Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Billi.
I'm Zara.
Yesterday, we saw the first US presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. It was fiery, robust, and at times it was very messy. It was also very different to the debate we saw between Trump and Biden in June. Then, Trump seemed like the almost certain winner, but now it is neck and neck. If you missed it, or if you're just here for a debrief, we will go through some of the key takeaways in today's podcast.
Billi, this morning, everyone is talking about US politics. We had the first debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris yesterday. If people are just starting to tune in, A, I understand it's been a long ride, but B, can you just give us a bit of the lay of the land?
Yep, so we are less than 2 months out from the US election. It is happening on the 5th of November. And I'm sure everyone knows now, but just a really quick reminder. So we have Kamala Harris, who is the official candidate for the Democratic Party, which Joe Biden is the current leader of. And the Democratic Party is generally considered to be left of center. And Kamala Harris is currently the vice president under Joe Biden. Then we have Donald Trump, who is the candidate for the Republican Party. So he was the president from 2017 to 2021, and he beat Hillary Clinton to become the president. Now, this is the third time that Donald Trump has run for president, the third consecutive time, after he lost in 2020 to Joe Biden. And one other thing to just quickly remember about US politics is that unlike in Australia, voting is not compulsory.
Yep.
So not only do candidates have to convince people to vote for them, but they also need to convince people to just vote full stop. And one weird little fact about US elections is that it happens on a Tuesday. So people literally have to leave work to go vote. So it's a bit of a hill just to convince people to get to that first step.
Yeah, I mean, the differences are many, but that is a huge one. One of the things that we share with, the US is this idea of debates and getting the leaders up to talk about policy, hopefully, and debate one another. In the US, we had the first debate, as I said, between these two candidates since Joe Biden pulled out of the race. What were the experts, the journos, anyone that was keenly watching, what were they looking for in this debate?
So first of all, Harris and Trump have never actually met in person. That really surprised me when I learned it. Clearly, they don't run in the same circles. So that was fascinating to watch, just them meeting for the first time face to face.
Kamala Harris. Let's have a good debate.
Nice to see you. Have fun.
Thank you.
Welcome to you both.
And when they did meet, one thing that was interesting was that they shook hands. That might sound like it's not interesting, but anyone who has watched previous debates between Biden and Trump, they have not shaken hands. And so it kind of shows that there could be this new era of perhaps more respect between Kamala.
I mean, and then you watched it.
Yeah, fair point. But it started off more respectful than others have. That's just a little side note. One other just general thing is that throughout these campaigns, both Harris and Trump have been trying to position themselves as this change candidate. I mentioned this the last time we did an episode on the US election, but it just keeps coming up. So Kamala Harris is trying to say, we're not going backwards by re-electing Donald Trump. She's saying that if you're tired of this Trump era of politics, then you should elect her because she will move the country forward, not back.
It is important that we move forward, that we turn the page on this same old tired rhetoric and address the needs of the American people.
I think it is also important to note the other kind of change element that Kamala Harris seems to be leaning into is that she is this youthful next generation. And I think that's an attempt to separate herself from Joe Biden and all of the kind of criticisms that were laid at his feet.
Yeah, as I said last time that we discussed this, she also just looks very different to all of the US presidents that we've had in the past. I mean, first and foremost, she is a woman.
Yeah.
So
she did have to stand there during the debate, though, and say, I don't know if you can see, but I am not Joe Biden and I am not Donald Trump. And, that was very obvious to anyone watching.
Yeah, and then we have Trump, on the other hand, who is also trying to position himself as the change candidate. And he's trying to tell voters that Harris has been the vice president for the last nearly 4 years. And so electing her will just be more of the same of this Biden era of politics.
So she just started by saying she's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border. They've had 3.5 years to create jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it?
So those were just some of the broad themes that kept coming up before the debate.
Yeah. One of the other key things that I saw coming up a lot as well was this idea that people didn't know a lot about Kamala Harris. She hasn't done a lot of sit-down interviews. She did, her very first one fairly recently. She hasn't had as much of an opportunity as someone like Donald Trump to let the world in and get to know her. And so this was a vital moment for her to take center stage and to let America in.
Yeah, I keep hearing that too, that people know that Kamala Harris is against Donald Trump, but they don't necessarily know what she's for.
Yeah.
And that's a key difference that keeps coming up. And that seems to be less of a problem for Trump. He has been president for 4 years. I think voters know very well who he is and what he stands for.
And on that idea of what he stands for and indeed what Kamala Harris stands for, the debates are meant to be solely or at least predominantly about policy. Oftentimes it gets kind of overshadowed by personality politics and everything else that happens when there are two very strong, very loud and proud candidates on the stage. But I do just want to start with the key policies because that is important. People are electing somebody based on what they are envisioning for the country. Can you take me through what both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris committed to in that debate about their vision for America?
Yeah, so at a really high level, I'd say that there are different policies, but both of them are really keen to talk about. So for Trump, he keeps wanting to talk about inflation, so the higher cost of living. We have that in Australia as well, and he's wanting to talk about it in the US. And then also immigration.
Yeah.
And then for Harris, she really wants to talk about abortion and also crime, and that comes from her background as a prosecutor.
Yeah, and there's a lot there. I mean, all of those topics would take days and days to unpack, but let's just go through it at a really high level. I want to start with immigration because Donald Trump especially did keep bringing the conversation back to this policy idea.
Yeah, it was clear that's what he kept wanting to bring the conversation back to. And that's because he claims that Kamala Harris has been in charge of the border for the past 3.5 years. I would say that it was during the immigration section of the debate that it seemed to turn the most messy. One of the examples is when Trump claimed that some immigrants have been eating dogs and cats. I'll play a little snippet of that.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
I just want to clarify here. You bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just say here, this is
the people on television say my dog was taken and used for food. So
that was certainly one of the moments of the debate that got a lot of headlines. But as you mentioned, on questions about the economy, on questions about foreign policy, like everything did come back to immigration. And if you do want to read up more about where both of these candidates land when it comes to actual policy, that didn't really get much airtime. It was more about, mudslinging and attacking one another. So there wasn't a whole heap of, policy announcements per se, but you can absolutely go away and read about where both candidates sit on that issue. I do want to turn to abortion because where Donald Trump favors immigration, it is very clear Kamala Harris is most comfortable talking about reproductive rights.
Definitely. So basically, the debate here surrounds the fact that the constitutional right to an abortion was ended in the US after the Supreme Court overturned it. And that came after Trump appointed justices to the Supreme Court who he knew were anti-abortion. Now, this meant when the US Supreme Court overturned the right to an abortion, that abortion then became a state issue in the US as opposed to a national issue. But now, during this campaign, there is a debate about if it should become a national issue again. Now, Harris is saying that if Trump was re-elected, he would sign a national abortion ban. Now, Trump outright denies that, but he does agree with several states that have introduced abortion bans since the constitutional right was overturned. Harris, on the other hand, is pro-choice, and so she is broadly against restricting access to abortions.
Yeah, and while we were watching this as an office, it's just so interesting, reproductive rights and abortion policy specifically, time and time again are coming up as the top issues in the US, alongside the economy and foreign affairs. And it's just remarkable that, we have two candidates who sit so far apart on this policy. There is very little, if any, overlap. And it was really in this part of the debate that we heard mentions of the vice presidential candidates on both sides as well. So Donald Trump came out and attacked Tim Walz, who is Harris's running mate, and Harris did the same on J.D. Vance. So really that does feel like a kind of battleground issue during this election. Another very big issue that both the moderators and the candidates themselves spent a lot of time talking about was foreign affairs. And I think that's because right now there are so many different wars that are raging across the globe. And also that under Joe Biden, the US withdrew from Afghanistan, which is another big topic. Talk me through where the candidates landed on these big issues.
Yeah, this was a really big one, and we did hear several times Donald Trump saying that we could be approaching World War III. So when it came to foreign affairs, both candidates were asked about their respective approaches to the wars in Ukraine, Gaza, and Afghanistan. I'll start with Ukraine. So Trump said that the war in Ukraine would have never happened if he had remained in office. And he then also said that if he was elected president, he would end the Russia-Ukraine war before he actually gets to office. So he's referring there to the period between when the November election is and when he would actually become president if he does win in January. Harris, on the other hand, said that she was a staunch supporter of Ukraine and President Zelensky, and she spoke a lot about the role of multilateral institutions like NATO in preventing the war from growing across Europe. Then came a discussion on the Israel-Hamas war. Harris was asked how she would break through the stalemate that Joe Biden has found himself in terms of reaching a deal between those two parties, which we know has been going on for about a year now. Harris said the war, quote, needs to end through a ceasefire and hostage deal, and said that she would work towards a two-state solution. I think worth pointing out that that's not a departure from what Joe Biden is saying. They're clearly very aligned on that topic. Trump responded to a question about how he would negotiate on this same issue by saying that Harris, quote, hates Israel, and claiming, quote, Israel will not exist within 2 years from now if she does win the presidency. Harris disputed that claim quite strongly. Then finally, the two candidates were asked about the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, which happened under Joe Biden, and that saw the Taliban return to power in the country. Harris said that she supported Biden's decision to withdraw, and then she spoke about Trump doing, quote, a terrible deal with the Taliban. Trump called the withdrawal the, quote, most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, and he also went on to suggest that Russia invaded Ukraine after seeing, quote, how incompetent she and her boss are.
I just want to pick up on that last little quote there, because you said how incompetent she and her boss are. And it was something I noticed the whole time through the debate, was that Donald Trump did not use Kamala Harris's name once in the full 90 minutes. He repeatedly referred to Kamala Harris as she or her, and often referred to Joe Biden as her boss. He did mention Joe Biden by name, but not his opponent once.
So interesting. And that wasn't true for Kamala Harris. She did refer to Trump by his name.
Yeah, and she was talking about, Trumpian politics and Trumpian policies, whereas he did nothing like that for her. Okay, so moving on, obviously there's a lot there. And again, we can only go through it really at a very high level to capture the breadth of it and to understand a bit about what is going on in the US at the moment. One of the quirks of debates is that there is a winner. That winner is crowned by no one person, but by media outlets more generally. Who was crowned the winner of this debate?
One of my favourite things to do with US politics is to watch CNN and Fox News kind of at the same time and tune in as simultaneously as I can, because they just cover the same thing so differently. And watching them after this debate, it was almost like they watched different debates. But despite that, it seemed pretty universal that media publications declared Harris as the winner of this debate. So CNN's poll said that 63% of debate watchers thought that Harris won the debate, and that was compared to 37% who say that Trump won. Washington Post asked undecided voters who they thought performed better, and 23 people said that Harris performed better as opposed to 2 people who thought that Trump was better. And then Fox News also ran an opinion article after the debate that said that Kamala Harris did win. But, and this was a big but for them that they kept bringing up in their broadcast after as well, they say that basically she only won because the moderators were in her favour and basically aided her to have a better performance. So basically we're completely biased towards her.
Yeah, and that really came up because Donald Trump was live fact-checked a lot more frequently. I don't even know if Kamala Harris was fact-checked once.
No, definitely not nearly as much as they did fact-check Trump.
Yeah, and so certainly the right-wing media and, you know, right-wing politicians were pointing to that and claiming that that was bias.
Yeah, and if you don't know what we're talking about, I mean, you did hear it just earlier when we were talking about the dog claim. You could hear the moderator countering what Donald Trump was saying. Here's just one more snippet of when it happened when they were talking about abortion.
Her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month is absolutely fine. He also says execution after birth. It's execution, no longer abortion, because the baby is born, is okay.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born.
But there is one person who disagrees that Harris won, and that is Trump. Trump himself was very happy. He seemed very happy with how the debate went, and he said it was his best debate ever. And he also said that he doesn't think that they need to have another debate because he would only want to have another debate if he lost. And in his eyes, he didn't lose.
Okay, so we have well and truly spoken about this debate, but just when media companies around the world thought that they could go to the kitchen to get a glass of water following the debate, Taylor Swift entered the chat.
Yeah, she did. She posted to Instagram declaring her support for Kamala Harris. And this was really interesting. We had a debate in the office about whether the Daily Aus should cover this because, of course, we don't cover every time a celebrity comes out in support of one of the candidates. But I think ultimately we decided that, you know, she probably is the most famous pop star, probably the most famous celebrity in the world right now, and her influence over young people is indisputable.
Yeah.
And so we did cover it, and I'll tell you just quickly what she said. She basically talked about how Trump just a few weeks ago had falsely claimed that Swift supported him, and she said that the best way to combat that misinformation is to tell the world the truth. And she said the truth is that she will be voting for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz at the election in November.
She also signed off her post, Taylor Swift, childless cat lady, and that was, of course, in reference to Trump's vice presidential pick, J.D. Vance, who has been critical of women without children. Billi, we need to let our listeners go on with their Thursdays.
Way over.
Before we do, what is the kind of one-sentence summary of where Trump and Harris are in the polls? How are they tracking ahead of November?
Basically, they are neck and neck. All the polls are saying that there is about a 1-point difference between them. So you just can't separate them no matter what. It will be an extremely tight race.
That's for sure. And Billi, thank you for jumping onto the pod and explaining everything that we need to know about all things American politics.
Thank you so much for giving me the space to talk about my true love that is US politics.
I thought you were going to say Taylor Swift.
No, and thank you so much to the listeners for listening to this episode of The Daily Aus. At the moment, we are running a survey to understand what it is you like about the Daily Aus' podcast and what it is you think that we could possibly improve on. The link for that will be in today's show notes. Thank you so much, and we'll be back again tomorrow.